Pericles' funeral speech was a speech written by Thucydides and delivered by Pericles for the history of the Peloponnesian War. Pericles made this speech not only for burying the dead and keeping the funeral private, but also for democracy. Pericles was a Greek statesman and leader during the Peloponnesian War. He is also a great supporter of democracy. He was so important to Athens and the Athenians that his name was given to an era, the age of Pericles. The funeral speech. In the following speech, Pericles made these points about democracy. 1. Man may progress in a democracy based on merit rather than wealth or hereditary status. This demonstrates that people of all ages, socio-economic classes, and professions can engage in politics and advance in it fairly. 2. In a democracy, people act legitimately while engaging in their preferred activities without worrying about prying eyes. At this point, as Pericles noted, individuals behave fairly in the midst of democracy and do not hesitate to engage in the activities they desire, even if others are around to watch them. 3. In a democracy, everyone is treated equally when there is a private dispute. This illustrates that in a democracy, everyone is treated equally in all circumstances, and the advantages and disadvantages of this treatment are the same for everyone. Pericles contributed a lot to the foundation of democracy with the speeches he gave and the excitement of the people. In his speech, he was able to get these people to accept this while talking about the need of apply the laws, why the rules exist, the guarantee that the law will give against unlawful acts, and the originality of his own constitution. Pericles' influence on democracy and politics. Pericles boosted public confidence in politics and democracy by praising democracy and his own people in his funeral address. Our constitution doesn't copy the laws of neighboring states. We are rather a pattern to the others than imitators ourselves. Its administration favors the many instead of the few. This is why it is called democracy. By speaking these comments at the graves of his fallen warriors, Pericles not only inspired the citizens of Athens but also persuaded them that they had a democratic right to participate in politics in their own nations. This was the major goal of Pericles' speech in the outset, but by often using the pronouns we, our, and us, he also started to enhance the audience's sense of self. With his speech, Pericles persuaded the Athenians, who initially believed he was simply there for the funeral, that democracy and politics are there for them. Pericles showed everyone that democracy exists for everyone, that everyone can have a voice in the most difficult times, in an environment where Sparta's success was envied. Thanks to Pericles, in the lands where democracy was born, everyone has become a believer in democracy.
Plato was an Athenian philosopher born in the mid-5th century BC in Athens. He was an important philosopher in ancient Greece, and his philosophical arguments were studied in both Western and Middle Eastern philosophy. He wrote the Republic, which contains many of his political arguments. Many subsequent contributions to political philosophy in antiquity make the Republic their main point of reference. And this shows us that his thoughts that were about politics were considered important in antiquity times. Plato on politics. Until philosophers rule as kings, or those who are now called kings, and leading men genuinely and adequately philosophize. That is, until political power and philosophy entirely coincide, while the many natures who at present pursue either one exclusively are forcibly prevented from doing so. Cities will have no rest from evils, nor I think will the human race. Aristocracy in the sense of government is advocated in Plato's Republic. This regime is ruled by a philosopher king and thus is grounded on wisdom and reason. He advocates aristocratic regime in his book Republic and proposes philosophers as the rulers so that the society will be ruled by a person of reason and wisdom. We can see that he prefers a political order that is good enough in terms of the ideal political system over the pursuit of the ideal perfect political system. In the book 1 chapter of his book Republic, he says that what form of political association is best for the people so far as it is possible for them to live as they would wish. Even though he advocates a philosopher king in an aristocratic government, he sees the democratic freedom as the best political association for the people. The best rational and righteous political order which he proposes leads to a harmonious unity of society and allows each of its parts to flourish, but not at the expense of others. The theoretical design and practical implementation of such order, he argues, are impossible without virtue. In conclusion, Plato's political opinions like political order, justice and virtue, which he argues that will lead to the well-being of people, show us that his arguments are compatible with democracy.
Aristotle was born in Stagira, Greece in 384 BCE and died on Euboea Island in 322 BC. He was a great scientist and philosopher. His works were the framework for both Christian scholasticism and medieval Islamic studies. Aristotle's ideas remained to influence Western philosophy for nearly 2500 years. His mentor was Plato. He studied in Plato's famous academy for 25 years and left academy after the death of Plato. He stayed with Alexander for several years due to an invitation from Philip II, father of Alexander and the king of Macedonia. Later on, he established his academy called Lyceum. Keeping in mind that he lived with important figures of ancient Greece, his ideas influenced many historical figures also. Aristotle on politics. Aristotle was not a fan of democracy. He hated Athenian politics. He thought Athens people were gullible and easily deceived by money. So to become the leader of Athens and gain the demos, common people of ancient Greek state, votes, they had to make the demos happy. Where there are revenues, demagogues should not be allowed after their manner to distribute the surplus. The poor are always receiving and always wanting more and more, for such help is like water poured into a leaky cask. With a similar approach to Plato's philosopher king, he also believed the state was best maintained under the rule of older, wiser, oligarchic personas and less democratic leadership. And he saw the most democratic leaders of Athens as not extreme oligarchs, because he believed that Athens was too democratic and with oligarchy came balance. Oligarchy was needed because demos opened the deception of leaders who put their own agenda in front of the state agenda. He argued that his politeia resides in Carthage and Sparta. These states were near examples of what he believed should be implemented in a state. Many of the Carthaginian institutions are excellent. The superiority of their constitution is proved by the fact that the common people remain loyal to the constitution of Carthaginians, have never had any rebellion worth speaking of, and have never been under the rule of tyrant. In those states, officials are selected by their wealth, and besides their wealth, their merit. Wealth was important for officials, according to Aristotle, because by being wealthy, officials did not mind money and other problems and were able to think freely in the office. Thus, as supporter of aristocracy, Aristotle believed best officials should be noble and wealthy, and that means officials came from small portion of society and not everybody had the right to decide for people. Demos cannot and should not rule themselves because they are poor and uneducated. Aristotle was biased toward the upper class, and it can be seen from his ideas. Like any philosopher or every single person, he saw the world from his perspective. Regardless of that, Aristotle's works remained important in every field he studied throughout history, and scholars learned so much information while studying his works. Pericles increased the Greek people's belief in democracy by his funeral oration and his allegations about democracy. Plato's opinions about politics, justice, and virtue are compatible with democracy. Therefore, his thoughts are possibly effective in people's thoughts and democracy, which influenced the political life in Greece. Aristotle supported the idea of oligarchy rather than Athenian democracy. He obviously biased towards upper class, but his actions highly affected Athenian politics. These three important figures were highly important for their time, and their ideas and beliefs stayed relevant throughout the history of mankind. We would have not lived in democracy if it were not for them. And what is worth, we should be thankful to them.